Professor Vex-Tal clicked his mandibles in what could generously be called amusement, though most species would recognize it as the sound of impending academic doom. The University of Galactic Sciences had seen its fair share of peculiar exchange students over the centuries. The methane-breathing Korvax, who insisted on wearing their atmosphere suits to formal dinners. The crystalline Xenithi, who kept accidentally cutting through furniture with their razor-sharp limbs. Even the infamous incident with the Bloblings, who had somehow managed to consume half the cafeteria before anyone realized they weren't actually cleaning it. But humans? Oh, humans were special. They had this delightful habit of making everything exponentially more complicated than it needed to be. So, Vex-Tal said, his 6 eyes focusing on the trembling figure before him, would you care to explain this? He held up a data pad, displaying what appeared to be chicken scratches. Actually, calling them chicken scratches would be insulting to chickens, who at least had the decency to make their marks in a somewhat organized fashion. The human student, one Marcus Webb according to his files, shifted nervously in his chair. The poor creature looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy, preferably somewhere with fewer tentacles and fewer questions about his apparent descent into academic madness. Professor, I can explain, Marcus began. Can you? Vex-Tal interrupted, waving one of his 4 arms dismissively. Because from where I'm sitting, and I have quite a good view from up here, thanks to my species' natural height advantage, it appears you've been scribbling in some sort of primitive pictographic system during advanced xenolinguistics. Marcus winced. It's not pictographic, sir. It's actually quite sophisticated. Sophisticated? Vex-Tal's voice rose several octaves, a sound that made nearby students in the hallway pause their conversations. My dear boy, I've been studying languages since before your species discovered fire. Again, this looks like someone gave a writing implement to a particularly artistic space slug and told it to have a go at literature. The truth was, Vex-Tal had been studying this particular scrap of writing for the better part of 3 hours. He'd run it through every linguistic database in the university's archives. He'd consulted with colleagues across 7 star systems. He'd even, in a moment of desperation, asked the cleaning drones if they recognized the patterns. Nothing. And that was troubling. Professor, Marcus said, his voice gaining a bit of strength. What if I told you this isn't just random scribbling? I'd say you're about to make this conversation significantly more interesting, Vex-Tal replied, leaning back in his chair. The furniture groaned under his considerable bulk. Being a Thraxian had its advantages in academic intimidation, but it played havoc on the university's budget for sturdy seating. Marcus took a deep breath. It's English, sir. Vex-Tal blinked, all 6 eyes, sequentially. It was quite a sight. English? The barbaric grunting language your species uses for basic communication? That's one way to describe it, Marcus said diplomatically. But this, Vex-Tal gestured at the pad again, this doesn't look anything like the simplified symbolic representation your people use for English in the Galactic database. That's because it's written English, Professor. The original form. We call it Cursive. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that makes small creatures burrow deeper into their hiding places. It was the silence that precedes either enlightenment or complete mental breakdown. In academic circles, the two were often indistinguishable. Cursive. Vex-Tal repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. Yes, sir. It's a way of writing where the letters connect to each other in a flowing motion. It was quite common on Earth for centuries. Was common? Vex-Tal's academic instincts were now fully engaged. This was either the most elaborate hoax in the university's history, or he was witnessing something genuinely unprecedented. Are you telling me your species has abandoned this writing system? Marcus nodded. Pretty much. Most humans can't read it anymore. It stopped being taught in schools around the early 21st century. Too time-consuming, they said. not practical in the digital age. Vex-Tal felt something that his species might generously call excitement, though it manifested as a low thrumming sound that made the office windows vibrate. So you're saying this is a dead language? Dead writing system, technically. But yes, essentially dead. And you learned this how, exactly? Marcus looked uncomfortable again. My grandmother taught me. She was old-fashioned. Said everyone should know how to write properly. I guess it stuck. The implications hit Vex-Tal like a cargo hauler at maximum velocity. A human student, sitting in his office, casually writing in what was effectively an extinct communication method. It would be like finding someone who still communicated exclusively through interpretive dance, or, gods forbid, poetry. "Show me," Vex-Tal commanded, sliding a fresh pad and stylus across the desk. Marcus hesitated. "Show you what? Exactly?" "Write something. Anything. I want to see this cursive in action." With the resigned air of someone who'd already committed to complete academic suicide, Marcus picked up the stylus and began to write. The movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. Letters flowed into each other like water finding the easiest path down a mountain. Vex-Tal watched, fascinated, as the human's hand moved across the surface. It was unlike anything in the galactic databases. Most species had evolved communication systems based on efficiency and clarity. The Korvax used precise geometric shapes. The Xenithi employed color-coded crystalline structures. The bloblings, well, the bloblings just sort of oozed meaningfully, but even that followed certain patterns. This human writing was different. It was artistic, unnecessary, complicated, utterly, completely human. "There," Marcus said, sliding the pad back across the desk. "It says, 'The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog.' It's a pangram, uses every letter of the English alphabet." Vex-Tal stared at the elegant loops and curves. To his trained eye, it looked like the most beautiful nonsense he'd ever seen. And humans used to write like this regularly? All the time? Letters, documents, personal notes. "My grandmother has boxes full of letters from my grandfather, written in cursive. They're completely unreadable to most of my cousins." "Remarkable." Vex-Tal was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "Marcus, do you understand what you've stumbled into here?" The human looked confused. "Not really, sir. I was just taking notes during your lecture on extinct communication methods. Seemed appropriate." Vex-Tal chuckled, a sound like grinding machinery having a particularly good day. "My boy, you've just demonstrated something that shouldn't exist. According to every database, every linguistic survey, every cultural analysis we have of your species, this writing system never existed." Marcus frowned. "But it did exist. Still does, technically. I mean, I'm using it right now." "That's the problem," Vex-Tal said, rising from his chair. His full height was impressive, even by galactic standards. "Our records show that humans developed writing systems. Yes, basic pictographs, simple alphabets, eventually the standardized symbols you use today. But nowhere, and I mean nowhere, is there any mention of this flowing, connected script. Maybe it was just overlooked during the cultural surveys?" Vex-Tal gave him a look that could have frozen hydrogen. "Son, the Galactic Cultural Preservation Society doesn't overlook things. They once catalogued 17 different ways the Mishnari sneeze. They have detailed analyses of Throrian bathroom habits. They documented the mating dances of species that reproduce through aggressive taxation policies." Marcus was beginning to look genuinely worried. "So, what does this mean?" "It means," Vex-Tal said, moving to his communication console, "that either our records are catastrophically incomplete, which would cause an academic scandal of unprecedented proportions, or—" He paused, his fingers hovering over the controls. "Or what?" "Or Your species has been hiding something from the galactic community. Something significant. The weight of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket made of pure anxiety. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. Then opened it again. The effect was rather like watching a fish attempting to negotiate a complex legal contract. "Professor," he finally managed, "I don't think anyone was hiding anything. It's just old-fashioned writing. My grandmother learned it from her grandmother, who learned it from her grandmother. It goes back centuries on Earth." "Centuries," Vex-Tal repeated. He was now actively typing commands into his console, accessing databases that required security clearances most professors only dreamed of. "Marcus, when exactly did your species join the Galactic Federation?" 2,387, I think? Something like that. 2,387. Precisely. And according to our records, comprehensive cultural surveys were conducted between 2,385 and 2,390, 5 years of intensive study. Every aspect of human civilization was documented, catalogued, and filed. The console beeped softly, displaying the results of Vex-Tal's search. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he scrolled through the data. "Professor? What is it?" Vex-Tal turned back to Marcus, his 6 eyes now fixed on the human with an intensity that made the air itself seem thicker. According to these records, cursive writing was never part of human culture. It doesn't exist in our files. Not as a historical footnote, not as an extinct practice, not even as a regional variation. "But that's impossible," Marcus protested. "I learned it from my grandmother." "She learned it from her grandmother. It's been passed down through my family for generations." "Has it?" Vex-Tal asked quietly. "Or has something else been passed down? Something that looks like a simple writing system but might be considerably more significant?" Marcus was now looking genuinely alarmed. The conversation had taken a decidedly sinister turn, and he was beginning to suspect that his innocent note-taking habit might have accidentally launched him into the kind of galactic incident that people wrote cautionary tales about. "Professor, I think you're overthinking this. It's just handwriting. Fancy handwriting, granted, but still just handwriting." Vex-Tal moved back to his desk and picked up the pad with Marcus's sample writing. He studied it again, this time with the eye of someone looking for hidden patterns, secret codes, encrypted messages. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said suddenly. "My grandmother? What does she have to do with anything?" "Humor me." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Well, she's normal, retired, lives in a small town on Earth, bakes cookies, watches old movies. Very typical grandmother stuff. And she taught you this writing system because she thought it was important to preserve old skills. She also taught me how to knit, how to can vegetables, and how to play something called checkers. She's into preservation of traditional crafts." Vex-Tal nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by this wholesome explanation. "And your family? Any unusual occupations? Government work? Archaeological interests? Membership in secretive cultural preservation societies?" "Professor, you're starting to sound like a conspiracy theorist." "Marcus," Vex-Tal said, seriously, "when you've been in academia as long as I have, you learn that the line between conspiracy theory and academic breakthrough is often surprisingly thin. The difference is usually just better documentation." The door chime sounded, interrupting what was becoming an increasingly surreal conversation. Vex-Tal glanced at his schedule display, then cursed in 3 different languages. "That'll be Dr. Yinara from the Department of Xenocultural Analysis," he said. "I may have mentioned your little writing sample to her." "You called in another professor?" Marcus asked, his voice climbing toward panic. "Doctor, Yinara isn't just another professor. She's the foremost expert on hidden cultural patterns in the galaxy. She once uncovered an entire secret language that the Merplings had been hiding for 2,000 years. The Merplings have a secret language? Had. It turned out to be mostly complaints about the temperature of their swimming pools. But the point is, if there's something unusual about your writing system, she'll spot it immediately. The door slid open to admit a creature that looked like someone had asked an artist to design the perfect fusion of elegance and academic intensity. Dr. Yinara was a Cylani, all flowing robes and graceful movements, but her multiple eyes held the kind of sharp intelligence that made even tenured professors check their footnotes twice. Vex-Tal, she said, in a voice like silver bells, being used to announce bad news, you mentioned something about an impossible writing system? Dr. Yinara, meet Marcus Webb, human exchange student and apparent master of non-existent linguistic arts. Dr. Yinara's gaze shifted to Marcus, who was now seriously considering the possibility that he should have just used standard galactic notation for his class notes, like everyone else. Show me, she said simply. Marcus looked at Vex-Tal, who nodded encouragingly. With growing resignation, Marcus picked up the stylus and wrote another. Sample sentence, "The early bird catches the worm." Dr. Yinara watched the process with the intensity of someone observing a particularly fascinating chemical reaction. When Marcus finished, she took the pad and studied it closely. Her expression was unreadable, but several of her eyes were moving independently, a sign that her brain was processing information at maximum capacity. Interesting, she murmured after several minutes. Very interesting indeed. Care to elaborate? Vex-Tal asked. This writing system, she said, still studying the pad, shows characteristics that shouldn't exist in human linguistic development. Marcus felt his stomach drop somewhere in the vicinity of his shoes. What kind of characteristics? The flow patterns, Doctor. Yinara explained, follow mathematical principles that most species don't develop until they reach advanced stages of cultural evolution. The connection points between letters create harmonic sequences that resonate with certain universal constants. I'm sorry, Marcus said weakly, but I think you're reading too much into my grandmother's handwriting lessons. Doctor? Yinara looked at him with an expression that might have been pity. Mr. Webb, this isn't just handwriting. This is a mathematically precise communication system disguised as artistic expression. The question isn't why your grandmother taught it to you. The question is where your grandmother learned it, and why your entire species seems to have conveniently forgotten that it ever existed. The room fell silent again, except for the soft hum of the ventilation system and the occasional click of Vex-Tal's mandibles as he processed the implications of Dr. Yinara's analysis. So, Marcus said finally, hypothetically speaking, if this writing system is something more than just fancy handwriting, what exactly would that mean? It would mean, Dr. Yinara said, her voice taking on the tone professors use when they're about to completely upend a student's understanding of reality, that somewhere in your species' past, humans had access to advanced mathematical and linguistic concepts that they shouldn't have possessed, and then, for reasons unknown, they chose to disguise this knowledge as a simple writing system, and gradually allowed it to fade from common use. But why would they do that? That, Vex-Tal said, is the question that's going to keep us all awake for the foreseeable future. Dr. Yinara set the pad down and looked at both Marcus and Vex-Tal. We need to contact the Department of Historical Anomalies, and probably the Office of Species Security. This could be bigger than any of us initially suspected. Marcus raised his hand tentatively. Excuse me, but could someone please explain what exactly I've gotten myself into here? Because an hour ago I was just a student taking notes, and now it sounds like I've accidentally uncovered some sort of galactic conspiracy. Not uncovered, Vex-Tal corrected. You've accidentally become evidence of one. And with that cheerful thought hanging in the air like a toxic cloud of academic uncertainty, the three of them stared at the innocent-looking pad of paper that had somehow managed to turn a routine disciplinary meeting into what was shaping up to be the most significant xenocultural discovery in recent galactic history. Marcus was beginning to suspect that his grandmother's lessons in traditional skills might have been considerably less traditional than he'd originally thought. The Department of Historical Anomalies occupied an entire floor of the university's research wing, which should have been Marcus's first clue that galactic academia took historical inconsistencies very seriously indeed. The second clue was the armed security guard, who escorted him through corridors lined with warning signs in 17 different languages. The third clue was probably the fact that his escort had more tentacles than seemed strictly necessary for crowd control. Try not to touch anything, Security Officer Blykes advised helpfully as they walked. Last week, a graduate student accidentally activated a temporal echo from the Great Muffin Wars of 3847. We're still finding crumbs in dimensions that shouldn't technically exist. Marcus decided that silence was probably his safest option at this point. The conference room they entered looked like someone had decided that the best way to inspire academic confidence was to make everything as intimidating as possible. The table was large enough to land a small spacecraft, surrounded by chairs designed for beings with anatomical features that Marcus preferred not to think about too closely. Already seated were Professor Vex-Tal and Dr. Yinara, looking appropriately serious. They were joined by 3 additional beings who radiated the kind of intellectual authority that made doctoral dissertations weep in terror. "Marcus," Vex-Tal said, gesturing to an empty chair, "allow me to introduce the team. Dr. Corinth, from Historical Anomalies, specialist in cultural discontinuities." He indicated a tall, reed-like being whose multiple arms were currently occupied with at least 6 different data pads. Professor Quintex, from Species Security, expert in hidden knowledge systems. This was directed toward a heavily armored creature whose idea of casual dress apparently involved enough metal plating to build a small starship. And Dr. Philora, from the Institute of Dangerous Ideas, our consultant on potentially hazardous information. Dr. Philora appeared to be made entirely of shifting energy patterns contained within a roughly humanoid outline. When she spoke, her voice sounded like someone reading poetry during a thunderstorm. "Mr. Webb, we understand you've accidentally stumbled upon something that officially doesn't exist." "So, I've been told," Marcus replied weakly, though I'm still not entirely sure what that something island Dr. Corinth looked up from his collection of data pads. "We've been analyzing the mathematical properties of your writing samples. The results are concerning." "Define concerning," Marcus said, though he was fairly certain he didn't want to know the answer. "The harmonic patterns embedded in your cursive writing match theoretical frameworks for advanced consciousness encoding," Dr. Corinth explained matter-of-factly. "In simple terms, each connected letter sequence creates a mathematical signature that could theoretically interface with higher-dimensional thought processes." Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry. What now?" Professor Quintex leaned forward, his armor creating small mechanical whirring sounds. "Your grandmother didn't teach you handwriting, Mr. Webb. She taught you a form of consciousness programming disguised as penmanship." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that makes time itself consider taking a coffee break. Marcus looked around the table at 6 pairs of very serious alien eyes, all focused on him with varying degrees of academic fascination and security concern. "Okay," he said finally. "I think there's been some kind of massive misunderstanding. My grandmother is just a sweet old lady who likes preserving traditional skills. She taught me cursive because she thought computers were making people forget how to write properly. That's it. No consciousness programming, no mathematical frameworks, just really fancy penmanship." Dr. Yinara slid a datapad across the table. "We contacted the Galactic Cultural Archive this morning. Here's what they found when they searched for any mention of cursive writing in human history." Marcus looked at the display. It showed exactly nothing. No entries, no references, no acknowledgement that such a writing system had ever existed anywhere in human civilization. "But that's impossible," he protested. "Cursive writing was used for centuries on Earth. There are historical documents, letters, official records. You can't just erase that much history." "Actually," Dr. Philora said in her stormy voice, "you can. Quite easily, in fact, if you have the right technology and sufficient motivation." "Are you suggesting someone deliberately removed all traces of cursive writing from galactic records?" "We're suggesting," Professor Quintex said carefully, "that someone may have recognized the true nature of this writing system and made the decision to classify it as too dangerous for general knowledge." Marcus felt a headache building behind his eyes. Too dangerous? It's handwriting. What could possibly be dangerous about connecting letters together? Dr. Corinth consulted one of his many data pads. "Based on our analysis, sustained use of this writing system could theoretically enhance cognitive function, improve pattern recognition, and potentially allow access to higher-order thinking processes that most species aren't naturally equipped to handle." In other words, Vex-Tal added helpfully, regular practice of cursive writing might accidentally make humans considerably smarter than anyone realized they could be. The room fell quiet again, as everyone contemplated the implications of an accidentally enhanced human population. Given humanity's already impressive track record for creative problem-solving and their unfortunate tendency to apply those solutions in unexpected ways, the prospect of even smarter humans was apparently cause for serious concern. "So," Marcus said slowly, "you're telling me that my grandmother accidentally taught me a form of cognitive enhancement disguised as old-fashioned penmanship, and somewhere in the galactic bureaucracy there's a file marked too dangerous for public knowledge with cursive writing listed under things to keep the humans from figuring out?" "That's actually a remarkably accurate summary," Dr. Yinara admitted. Marcus put his head in his hands. "My grandmother is going to be so proud. She always said cursive writing would open doors for me. I just never imagined they'd be the doors to a galactic conspiracy." Dr. Philora's energy patterns shifted in what might have been amusement. "The question now is what we do with this information. Knowledge of this writing system could potentially destabilize the current balance of galactic intellectual resources. Or," Professor Quintex said grimly, "it could explain why humans have been adapting to galactic civilization faster than their cultural development timeline should allow. If cursive writing was more widespread than our records indicate, we might be looking at a species that's been accidentally enhancing their cognitive abilities for generations." Marcus looked up sharply. "Wait, are you saying other humans might know cursive writing too?" "It's possible," Dr. Corinth replied. "Cultural preservation often happens in isolated pockets. Traditional skills get passed down through families, small communities, specialized groups. If cursive writing survived in your family, it likely survived elsewhere. Which means," Vex-Tal said with growing excitement, "there could be humans throughout the galaxy who possess this enhanced writing system without realizing its true significance. Enhanced humans who have been integrating into galactic society for over a century," Dr. Yinara added thoughtfully. "Enhanced humans in positions of responsibility, influence, and authority." Professor Quintex concluded with obvious security concerns. Marcus was beginning to understand why this meeting had required armed escorts and rooms designed to contain temporal anomalies. "So what happens now?" Dr. Philora's patterns swirled more rapidly. "Now, we face a choice. We can classify this discovery, add it to the restricted archives, and pretend this conversation never happened. Or we can investigate further and risk uncovering something that might fundamentally change our understanding of human potential. And if we choose to investigate, then we'll need to approach this systematically," Dr. Corinth said, already reaching for another datapad. "Survey human populations for cursive writing knowledge. Analyze the cognitive effects on practitioners. Determine the historical scope of the practice. and assess the implications for galactic society. All while maintaining absolute secrecy, Professor Quintex added. If word gets out that humans have been accidentally enhanced for generations, it could cause significant political complications. Marcus laughed, a sound that contained more hysteria than humor. So, let me get this straight. I came to university to study alien languages. Instead, I've accidentally uncovered evidence that my entire species might be cognitively enhanced super beings who have been hiding this fact from the rest of the galaxy, possibly without even realizing it ourselves. More or less, Vex-Tal confirmed cheerfully. Congratulations, by the way. This is likely to become one of the most significant xenocultural discoveries of the century. Assuming it doesn't cause a complete collapse of interspecies relations, Dr. Yinara added helpfully. Marcus stared at the datapad, still displaying the complete absence of cursive writing from galactic records. Can I ask one more question? Of course. If cursive writing is this mathematically sophisticated consciousness programming system, how did humans develop it in the first place? I mean, according to your records, we should never have been advanced enough to create something like this on our own. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. This one contained the weight of implications that none of them had fully considered until now. Dr. Felora's energy patterns dimmed slightly. That, Mr. Webb, is an excellent question, and one that suggests this mystery may be considerably deeper than we initially suspected. Professor Quintex's armor made unhappy mechanical sounds. If humans didn't develop cursive writing naturally, then someone or something taught it to them. The question is, who and why? And whether they're still around? Dr. Corinth added quietly. Marcus felt the universe shift slightly around him, the way it does when you realize that what you thought was a simple academic problem has just revealed itself to be connected to something vast, ancient, and potentially dangerous. So, he said finally, what's our next step? Vex-Tal's mandibles clicked in, what might have been anticipation or terror. Our next step, my dear Marcus, is to call your grandmother. The meeting adjourned with plans for the most carefully orchestrated phone call in galactic history. As Marcus left the conference room, escorted once again by the overly tentacled security officer, he reflected on the morning's events. He had woken up as an ordinary exchange student with a minor note-taking habit. He was ending the day as the accidental key to unraveling what might be the greatest conspiracy in galactic history. His grandmother, he suspected, was going to have some explaining to do, assuming, of course, that she actually was just a sweet old lady who liked preserving traditional skills, and not something considerably more complicated, disguised in cardigans and cookie recipes. The thought that his cookie-baking, knitting enthusiast grandmother might be connected to an ancient galactic mystery was somehow both the most absurd and most terrifying possibility he'd encountered all day. And given the day he'd had, that was really saying something. As the security door sealed behind him, with a sound like finality itself, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if his next family visit was going to require significantly more advanced security clearance than usual. Something told him that Sunday dinner conversations were about to become a lot more interesting. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. It was just the kind of humor that preferred cosmic-scale practical jokes to simple punchlines. Marcus made a mental note to start writing his letters home in regular, non-enhanced penmanship from now on. The last thing he needed was to accidentally program his parents with consciousness-expanding correspondence. Though, given everything he'd learned today, he was beginning to suspect it might already be too late for that.